Welcome to 3D Animation and VFX Masterclass, Session 3. Hello everyone. Welcome to Session 3, Understanding 3D Space. In this session, we will learn about Cartesian Coordinates, World Space versus Local Space, Viewport Navigation, Camera Controls. In this first part, we have an introduction to 3D space. We are diving into the foundation of all 3D work, the concept of space. Now, when we say 3D space, we are talking about a mathematical environment where all your objects are live. Whether you are animating a character, modeling a spaceship, or setting up light, understanding space is non-negotiable. Why is this important? Well, think of it like learning the layout of a building before you start planning its walls. Without spatial awareness, your models might float in the air or your animation might twist in weird directions. So, this session lays the groundwork for your success in everything else you will do in Blender or Maya. Let's start by breaking down what 3D space really is. Cartesian Coordinates. Every 3D program, Blender, Maya, or Unreal, is built on something called Cartesian Coordinate System. It's like a 3D version of the graph paper you used in school. The system has three axes: left to right, usually shown in red, which is X, front to back, usually in green, which is Y, up and down, usually blue in color, which is Z. The point where all these axes meet, 0, 0, 0, is called the origin. It's like the center of your universe in 3D space. Everything you place is measured in units relative to this point. If an object has coordinates 2, 0, -3, it means 2 units to right, 0 units forward or backward, and 3 units below the center. Let's see a small demo in Blender about Cartesian coordinates. So this is our cube in the scene. Here the cube is in the center of the scene. You can notice 3 colored arrows attached to it. This represents the X, Y, and Z axis. The red arrow points along the x-axis, which is the left to right direction. The green arrow is the y-axis, which goes front to back. And the blue arrow shows the z-axis, which points up and down. These axes make up the Cartesian coordinate system, basically a 3D grid that helps position objects precisely. Let me show you how this works in practice. Press G on your keyboard to grab the cube and then press X. It will make the cube move only along the x-axis. So you can move the cube wherever you want along the x-axis. If you want to place the cube where you have moved it, just left click the mouse. This will place the cube there. If you want to get the cube back to original position, simply press Ctrl Z on your keyboard. This will automatically bring your object back to its original place. Now, if you want to move the cube along the y-axis, press G to grab the cube and then press Y. Now you can move the cube front and back in the 3D scene. If you want to place it there, click the mouse. If you want to move the cube along Z-axis, press G to grab the cube, then Z to move it in the up and down direction. Now press Z, then press X and move the cube and place it wherever you want. Then click the mouse. To know the exact coordinates of the cube in the 3D scene, press N to open the transform panel on the right. Here under location, you can see the numeric values for X, Y, and Z. When I move the cube, these numbers update in real time. Like you can see, if I move the cube along x-axis, the x values in the transform panel are changing. If I move it along y-axis, the y values will change. If I move it in z-axis, the z values will change. This is how you can find the exact position or coordinates of the object in your 3D scene. You can simply set it to 0, 0, 0 to bring it to the center of your scene. Understanding this coordinate system is crucial because everything you place or animate is based on these values. It's like GPS for your objects. Try experimenting with moving the cube using keyboard shortcuts. It helps you build your muscle memory. Next, we have understanding the origin. The origin point is like the north star of your scene. It's 0, 0, 0. The absolute center of your 3D world. Why is it so important? Because many operations like snapping objects, rotating from central point, parenting, or even exporting assets depends on where the origin is. When you start modeling, you will often be told to keep your mesh close to the origin. That's because if your object is too far, lighting, camera, and animation can behave oddly. If your origin isn't aligned, your pivot controls get confused. Now, let's have a quick demo in Blender about origin. Let me zoom in. The orange dot which we see here is the center of this cube. All rotations, scaling, and many transformations happen around this point. For example, if I want to rotate this cube, it will spin around this pivot point. You can see the straight line from the pivot point. So it will just spin around that pivot point only. In whichever direction I want to rotate, it will rotate in that axis around that pivot point. If I move this cube, the center pivot point also moves along with that cube. You can see the orange dot. Now, let's see what happens if we move the cube far away from the center. Let me click Z mode. Now press G and press X or Y or Z in whichever direction you want to move. I am pressing X. I am moving the cube far away from the center. So the cube is at location like minus 133.1 meters. Now, if I press Alt G, it instantly resets the cube position back to the origin point, which is 0, 0, 0. Like, if you want to place the cube wherever you want, like press G and press whichever position you want. So the cube is at position like minus 18 in x-axis, minus 25 in y-axis, 13 in z-axis. Now I am pressing Alt G. It will snap at the center of the scene, that is 0, 0, 0. The origin is very important when you want precise control over your object. Point to be noted. Sometimes the origin is not at the center of your geometry. To fix this, you can set the origin to the center of this geometry. Go to the object, set origin and origin to geometry. You can click that. You can also set the origin to the 3D cursor location or the center of mass depending on what you want to do. Keep in mind, having the origin properly placed makes animations and transformations predictable and easier to control. And also always secure object's origin before starting animations. Next, we have world space versus local space. Imagine you're standing on a rotating platform holding a cup. The direction the cup faces depends on two things: your direction, that is local, the room's direction, that is world. In a 3D software, world space refers to global environment. The universal XYZ direction. Local space, on the other hand, is related to the object's own rotation and scale. If you rotate an object in 90 degrees, its local y-axis might now point sideways instead of forward direction, even though the world y is still forward. Understanding this helps in animation and rigging, especially when bones and objects need to follow relative directions. Now, let's have a quick demo on this as well. World space versus local space. Now, this is a concept that often confuses beginners. The difference between world space and local space. Think of world space as the entire room you are in. No matter where you stand or which direction you face, north is north, always north. In 3D terms, the world's x, y, and z axis remain fixed. Local space is like standing on a rotating platform, holding a flashlight. Your local axis rotates with you. Now, let me show you in Blender. I am going to rotate this cube 90 degrees on the Z axis by pressing R, then Z, then typing 90 and enter. So this rotated my cube 90 degrees in Z axis. If you have any doubts, you can check by pressing N. This is the transform panel which will open when you press N. So in here you can see, notice how the red arrow which represented the x-axis is now pointing in a different direction relative to the world. Now up here in the viewport we can see a drop down says global. That's world space. If I switch it to local, the gizmo moves to follow the cube's own rotation. So we can have changed the cube rotation to 90 degrees. The gizmos of the cube also rotated in 90 degrees to follow the cube's own rotation because it's in local world space. Let me shift it to global space and we'll try to move the cube in x-axis. Press G and then X. So we can move the cube in x-axis. Here you can see on the top left corner, we are moving the cube along global x-axis. And if I change it to local and then I press G and then I press X, it will move the cube along x-axis. If I press X again, now you can see the cube is moving along local X, which is cube's own rotation or own moving axis. So let's shift it to global and we'll change the values to 0. As I told, we can also do it like this Alt G. It will bring to the center of the scene. This distinction is vital for rigging and animation because you often want parts to move relative to themselves, not to whole scene. Use global for positioning objects precisely in scenes and local for animating and rigging. So next, we'll move to viewport navigation. The 3D viewport is your window into the 3D world. To really create 3D, you need to learn how to navigate. Orbit lets you rotate around your objects. Pan helps you move the viewport without rotating. Zoom, of course, lets you get closer or further away from the object. There are two viewing modes, perspective and orthographic. Perspective gives a realistic scene of depth. Orthographic flattens the 3D object, which helps you visualize 3D model in real-time scaling. If you are using number keypad, remember this. 1 is equal to front view, 3 is equal to side view, 7 is equal to top view, 5 is equal to toggle between perspective and orthographic. This we have discussed in previous session as well. Now let's have a quick demo for navigation controls. Navigation is your key to working efficiently in 3D. To orbit around the scene, hold the middle mouse button. Hold the middle mouse button and drag. This rotates your view around the point you are looking at. Now, to pan, we have to hold the shift button and press middle mouse button and drag the mouse. This will move your scene sideways or up and down without changing the angle. The angle is static, but we can move left, right, up and down by clicking shift and middle mouse button. And scroll your mouse wheel to zoom in or out smoothly. Now, let me show you how the number pad keys can instantly change views. Press 1 for front view. You will X-ray to the object. Plus 3 for right side view. Press 7 for top view. Press 5 to toggle between perspective and orthographic views. You may wonder what is perspective and orthographic views. Perspective view gives us realistic depth. Objects get smaller when far away. Orthographic removes perspective distortion and is super useful when modeling because it lets you work within exact shapes without foreshortening. Learning these shortcuts will speed up your workflow significantly. Practice switching views quickly during modeling to catch mistakes from different angles. I'm repeating this keyboard shortcuts and navigating in this scene because it will be very useful. It will be very helpful if you learn these keyboard shortcuts and number pad shortcuts. This will be very helpful in further sessions. Next up, we have camera view and controls. You can't create great animation or renders without a camera. The camera lets you frame your scene like a photographer. In render, you can press 0 on the number pad to enter camera view. You can also lock the view to the camera and view the view as you orbit. To move the camera like a real object, use the move and rotate tools. Cameras are just like any other object. They can be animated, parented, and constrained. We will go to Blender. Finally, let's talk about the camera, which is how you will frame your final shots. We will delete this default camera. So if you want to add a camera, press Shift A. And we can see the camera right over here. This will add the camera to your scene. This is here. We can move it like any other object. And also we can see the camera is added in our hierarchy. Now, if you press 0, this switches your viewport to the camera's perspective. So, this is what we can see as render output in our scene. Now, select the camera. To make adjusting easier, open this panel by pressing N on your keyboard. And now go to this View tab and enable Lock Camera to View. Now, when you orbit, pan or zoom, the camera view changes accordingly, just like moving a real camera and set. Let's see in this scene. If I zoom out, the camera is zooming out. If I zoom in, the camera is zooming in. If I pan, the camera is also panning with us. If I move, I mean if I rotate, the camera is also rotating. In this way, we can see our entire scene through the camera. What we will get in render scene. We can also select the camera by pressing G. So this is our camera. And also, like every object, we can select it and press G button to move and R to rotate. And Z. No, we can't do scaling for camera. In the camera property tabs, we can see this green icon. In this properties panel, these are camera properties. We can adjust focal length. Lower focal length gives us wide angle look, great for landscapes and interiors. Higher focal length zooms in like a telephoto lens, isolating your object. Remember, good camera placement is critical for storytelling and composition. Always check your scene from the camera view before rendering to ensure your shot looks great. We will go in depth about focal length, length unit, and shift X and Y. Clip start and depth of field, safe areas, background images, etc. Everything will go in future sessions. Now that we have understood world and local space, let's zoom into something even more practical, the pivot point and transformation tools. So, what exactly is pivot point? You can think of it's an anchor point of object. It is a point around in which your object rotates, scales and transforms. Each object in Blender has a pivot point usually placed at center by default. But we can change that, and doing so can dramatically affect how the 3D object behaves when we move or animate it. Let me give you a good example. Think of a door. Assume this is a door. The pivot point of the door is at the center of the door. When we rotate it, it will rotate weirdly, like spinning its place. But if the pivot point is at edge, like the hinge, it will show you. I will show you. We can change the pivot point of the object in Blender. We have to go to edit mode by pressing tab. And we have to select two vertex points. After selecting that, press Shift S and we're gonna select cursor to selected. So this moves the cursor to the selected position, and then we have to go to select a position, and then we have to go to object mode by pressing tab. In here, select object, set origin to 3D cursor. This moves our pivot point of the object to the cursor position of this object. So when I rotate the object now, it will act like this. This is the major importance of the pivot point. Blender gives us several pivot point modes to help us. Median point. This is the average center of all selected objects or vertices. So when we want to set this pivot point to center, we can click Origin to Geometry. This is our median point. So now the object will rotate from its center position. "3D cursor", a really flexible one, like I have shown you by adjusting the cursor position. We can place the cursor anywhere in our scene. This is our 3D cursor in the scene. If we press Shift and right click, the cursor will change its position. If I place the cursor here by clicking Shift and right click the mouse, the cursor is here. When I select the object and go here, select object, set origin, now we are setting origin to 3D cursor. Now this will become the pivot point from this object. Now, when I rotate this object, this will rotate, making this point as the center of this object. Like this will become the pivot for this object and will rotate accordingly to move accordingly. Now, origin to geometry will make the pivot point center to the object. Now, what can we do to bring this cursor to the center? By clicking Shift and C, the cursor moves to the center of our scene, like you can see that. Now, let's talk about transform tools. We already talked about this earlier, but those are very important in our further sessions. Remember that. G is for move, R is for rotate, S is for scale. These tools are your bread and butter. Combined with different pivot settings, they give you precision and creativity. For instance, scaling multiple objects from their centers use median point. Rotating them around one anchor object use active element. Want to rotate something from the custom point, place the 3D cursor and use it as a pivot point. Also, when you are in edit mode, changing pivot points affects how vertices move, not just the object as a whole. This becomes super useful in character mode. So, to summarize this section, mastering pivot points help you control how transformations work. When combined with Blender's G, R and S tools, it gives you professional level precision in modeling, rigging and even animation. It's a small detail that has massive impact on your workflow. This simply means always being conscious of where your objects are, how they are oriented, and how they are interacting within the 3D world. When you start working in 3D, especially as a beginner, it's easy to lose track of what's happening in the scene. One common mistake is accidentally rotating an object upside down or moving it far away from the origin. Another is unknowingly working on the bottom side of an object and wondering why the light or animation looks wrong. So, how do we stay aware? Always keep an eye on the X, Y and Z axis in the corner of your viewport. Red axis for X, green for Y, blue for Z. Get into habit of checking this whenever you orbit around the scene. Second, use number pads. Use 1 for front, 3 for side, 7 for top to realign your view. Pressing 5 toggles between perspective and orthographic views, which can help you get clean alignments. If we click Alt G, this will reset our object's location. We can also click Alt R and Alt S to reset scale and rotation. This brings the object back to its original scale, perfect for fixing messy scenes. Also, snapping is your friend. Enable snap to grid to keep objects aligned and prevent strange positioning errors. Why is all this important? Because clean scenes, clean animations, clean models, and faster workflows. Everything is aligned, properly rotated, and properly placed with intention. Exporting and rigging becomes much easier. Mistakes later in production often trace back to bad scene awareness early on. So remember, the 3D space is like a real workspace. If you keep your decks clean and organized, you will find your tools faster and make fewer mistakes. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we have explored today. We begin with the concept of 3D space, which might seem abstract at first, but it is an invisible structure that supports every single model, animation, and camera move in the 3D digital world. Without understanding this space, even the most beautifully designed model can behave unpredictably. Then we have looked into the Cartesian coordinate system, which is heart of navigating the space. The X, Y, and Z axis aren't just lines. They are your map. X helps you move left or right, Y moves you forward or backward, and Z lifts you up or down. When combined, they allow you to position and rotate objects with pinpoint accuracy. We also learned about the origin. It's like the center of gravity for your scene. Whether you are modeling, parenting, or aligning rigs, returning objects to the origin helps maintain structure and clarity in your workflow. This distinction between world space and local space is another game changer. Understanding which one you are working on can prevent unexpected results, especially in animation. Local space lets you move an object relative to its own direction, while world space moves it based on global environment. We practiced Viewport navigation, which may seem simple, but it is one of the most crucial skills for any 3D artist to look at your models from every angle, ensuring details and accuracy. Finally, we touched on camera controls. Cameras are the audience's eyes. What they see is what you show. Looking into the camera view, setting up shots, and even animating the camera gives you storytelling power that rivals filmmaking. Today was all about building your 3D spatial awareness, the first pillar of becoming a confident 3D artist. In the next session, we will move on to modeling, and everything you learned about space will directly influence how you create and manipulate your first 3D object. Until then, I encourage you to open Blender, practice moving around the scene, switch between views, and try placing objects using the coordinate axis.